My name is Ellen Coleman, and I'm President of CEO at VOZ Advisors, and I'm happy to have the chance to speak with you today about patient and advocate engagement and market access. In a minute, I will give you background on VOZ so you can understand why we were asked to speak today. But for my part, I've been at VOZ for 12 years, and I've been in healthcare for close to 40 years in the hospital setting, as an executive in a large nonprofit cancer organization, and on the pharma side, helping a device get to market. What I'd like to do, first of all, is lay the foundation for what I want to help to do today in today's presentation. First of all, I want to talk about the importance of integrating the patient voice across the drug development continuum. I hope to help you understand the role of patients and advocates in supporting market access concerns. And I also want to, at the end, wrap up by discussing some best practices in engagement related to market access. So I want to do a brief overview of VOZ, but I'm not going to take too much time to do that, but I think it will help you understand why we're able to talk about these issues and how we view them through the lens of the many companies that we work with. So VOZ's vision is a world where the patient experience informs the development and the commercialization of all medical products. And the way that we think about that is, first of all, our entire purpose at VOZ is to help companies build mutually beneficial collaborations with patients and advocates to reach shared objectives. We've had this singular focus for about 25 years. And because many of us come from the patient advocacy community, we have trusted relationships globally, regionally, and nationally. And we work with companies to ensure a strong internal engagement and advocacy structure, as well as helping companies make those relationships externally with key stakeholders. We have a global presence. VOZ has a headquarters in New York City, but we work globally through affiliate consultants around the world. And just wanted to give you a sense of our representative clients. And this may be helpful because our perspectives and the things that I will talk about today come from both working with small startup biotechs and very large, well-established pharmaceutical companies. So the first thing I want to really focus on is why engage. And unless you've been living in a cave for a while, I would assume that many of you are viewing this presentation and being highly familiar with why it's important to engage patients and advocates in your drug development process. It's happening all over the industry, and at VOZ, we believe it's here to stay, and we're very happy about that. This was not always the case. In my early years of doing this work, we had a lot of difficulty getting companies to engage with advocates, and hardly ever with patients directly, before the phase 3 trial experience. But in the last 6 to 8 years, this has changed substantially. So what really accounts for this change? So really the importance of the patient perspective has been well recognized globally. One of the reasons is that regulators and payers have begun to realize that understanding what matters to patients allows us to be closer to developing effective treatments. This shift from the regulator and payer side has ushered in a sea change of how pharma and biotechs do their business. So this is also, an evolving feature globally across the ecosystem, and this emphasis is seen in both the public and the private sector. And on the left side of the slide, I'm talking a bit about the public sector. In the US, this effort was bolstered by the commitment to PDUFA 5 to gather the patient perspective and the subsequent guidance documents that FDA developed. PDUFA 6 built upon and accelerated the requirements for patient engagement. And then this is going to be carried through to PDUFA 7, which will include understanding the patient view on cell and gene therapy and expanding the use of the patient experience data in regulatory review. In the EU, HTA efforts to include the patient experience, of course, vary by country, but are ongoing. The EMA recently announced their goal to bring patient groups earlier into the evaluation process. On the right side, I'm giving you an example of an organization, Patient-Focused Medicines Development, that have been bringing together multiple stakeholders to build foundational resources for engagement. And that's evidenced here by this diagram that they've created, a patient engagement quality criteria that's been developed and it's widely available for use. So this is spreading throughout both the public and the private sector. So what about the payers? And this is a little bit harder to have access to what payers are thinking, but in digging, I found a few examples that might be of interest to you. There's a bit of a competing interest between patients and payers. Patient communities have high expectations for access, but payers are really poised to impose stringent controls on use. Patient communities are eager to communicate with payers, but yet few formal processes are in place that are helpful guardrails for how to have those communications. Patients prize improvements in quality of life and functional status, but payers often view clinical trial evidence on PROs as underdeveloped or underreported. So there are some efforts to address this gap. A current PCORI grant that's ending this fall has as its primary objective to develop principles of communication that can be used to support dialogue between patients and payers. And the purpose being to educate both communities on evidence-based practices and information sharing as novel therapies reach the market. So we look forward to seeing those guidelines on communication. Since 1999, NICE in the UK has involved patients and organizations to contribute to NICE guidance. And their two key principles are to first ensure patient participation. That's a key aspect of what they want to do, and that this participation makes their guidance and their products have much greater relevance. You may be familiar with the HTA interest group for patient and citizen involvement in HTA that brings together multiple stakeholders, including patients, advocates, clinicians, and HTA and industry who have interest in patient and citizen involvement in HTA. And among their objectives are the ability to strengthen HTA by systematic incorporation of the patient and citizen perspectives, and also to promote and develop robust methods to incorporate patient and citizen perspectives in HTA. I located some recent research that was talking about evaluating the role of PRO data in reimbursement decisions, particularly in the oncology space. And it noted that payers worldwide recognize high-quality PRO data as a key component of their decision-making process, and also saw, importantly, the validation of PROs in the target population as a key factor. So that really, again, ensures that patient input is really part of the equation. So what VOZ knows and our clients are finding is that engaging patients early and often is essential. Their input allows for a stronger value proposition, development of drugs that patients want, that regulators will approve, and that payers are willing to pay for. And really, that's the trifecta. That's all of us are looking for. And it's routine now for regulators and payers to ask how and what kind of patient input was sought to ensure a drug reflects the patient's needs. The patient input also helps companies understand whether a trial will detract from or encourage enrollment. Prior to patient engagement activities being so strong, companies often ask us at VOZ to bring together patients and advocates to help a company understand why a trial wasn't recruiting or how they could help after the fact. In every single one of those meetings, it was very clear that had the patients been consulted on the trial design and the recruitment problems earlier, that costly amendments and recruitment problems would have been avoided. I just mentioned the importance of payers to ensuring that the PROs are validated in the target population. Co-creation of PROs with advocates and patients is something that is really important to them and provides a more complete understanding of the impact of your interventions and builds trust in the communities that you're looking to serve. So I want to talk a little bit now, dig a little bit deeper in what patients and advocates call access advocacy. In this section, I want to talk about 4 different things. First of all, how do patients and advocates define success and value and access? What kinds of input from patients and advocates can support market access strategies? What are the best practices for involving patients and advocates in market access? And what are some resources that might be helpful for those of you who might want to learn more? Oops. So how do patients and advocates think about value from their view? Value frameworks that have been developed often reflect only clinically focused values. But what matters to patients is shaped by many additional factors, including how they define quality of life, as well as how they have their individual circumstances impact what they think about their illness, and in fact, how it changes over time. And I'll give you an example of a recent meeting that we had with MDs and patients where the company was looking to understand what some PROs would be for this patient population. It was in a painful female pelvic condition. The physician side stated unequivocally that pain during intercourse was the most important PRO. While the patients in the room differed significantly, their pain impacted their ability to work, their ability to go to the movies, their ability to have any type of social interaction. Sexual activity was the furthest thing from their mind. So while both sides are important, you can see that there's often differences in the way that they value different things. So it's really important that patients be closely involved in developing value frameworks. This information that I'm talking about now has come from a peer-reviewed article that's written by global oncology patient leaders. And their claim is that better health outcomes and more prudent use of resources occur when the patient perspective is included. And I think more and more we're seeing that that is true. So I want to talk then a little bit more about access from the advocate's point of view. So the advocate's key aim in working with systems and decision makers is to ensure that patients have access to care and treatment that support their health. There's multiple ways they do this, including educating and providing evidence on unmet needs and barriers to care, advocating with policymakers, describing the patient experience as evidenced, as many of you may have participated in FDA patient-focused drug development meetings. They also work directly with patients to help them with treatment decision-making. Their take on access issues does have some overlap with industry, but may differ in some ways. Particularly in rare disease, there's a great concern about what it takes for patients to actually get diagnosed. There's also concerns about how patients will afford their care, whether insurance will put up barriers such as step therapy requirements. I'll speak in a few minutes about a case study where one of the biggest advocate concerns was whether MDs would provide the new options to patients and offer them those options. And that's of greatest concern for them as well. They are concerned about its adherence and persistence to meds, and also the ability to access resources that help patients cope with their illness. Those are all key concerns in terms of access for patients and advocates. This slide is probably something that many of you have seen in one form or another, and it describes the opportunities to engage patients and advocates across the entire drug development continuum. What I've done here is I've bolded a few areas across the life cycle where contributions can be made, particularly on market access concerns. And you can see that they start early on. You know, we've been learning lately that many of our companies are working much, much earlier with advocates on market access concerns. So developing a patient experience map early in the discovery process is something that many of our clients do quite regularly. Collaborating on data from existing registries and offering input on meaningful endpoints is something that often happens in the clinical environment. Identifying barriers to diagnosis and screening and other issues around clinical development. Of course, the closer you get to market, the more opportunities there are for patients and advocates to advocate for proper reimbursement and to support efforts in gathering real-world evidence. Post-market efforts include creating patient-friendly clinical treatment guidelines and building registries on approved treatments, as evidenced by a recent Alzheimer's Association announcement of a national collaborative effort to collect real-world data on newly approved treatments. That just happened, I think, a week ago. So I want to turn now to talking about a few case studies that offer some real-world examples from our work at VOZ to demonstrate access, advocacy, and action. In this first case study, the challenge was that there was introduction of novel oral anticoagulants into a market where MDs were very comfortable with the current standard of care, which was warfarin. But advocates firmly wanted to ensure that patients would have choice of access in the new orals in addition to the standard of care. They felt that they were more adequate and more helpful to patients. So after convening a global advisory board to understand unmet patient needs, patient organizations collaborated with a company to create a global patient charter, which outlined actions that healthcare providers, policymakers, and patients could take that would ensure awareness of and access to new technologies to prevent stroke and atrial fibrillation. 40+ organizations globally helped create, disseminate, and promote the ideas behind this charter. And there were yearly summits that were convened that engaged both old and new advocates in the process and offered education on how to talk with policymakers, how to engage with regulators, as well as how to talk with the media and build ideas for social media campaigns around awareness. The awareness campaign resulted in stroke prevention being elevated on national health agendas in a number of countries, with over 700,000 individuals and 150 organizations supporting the effort. This next case study is more about access to a particular medication. In this case, it was for individuals with a rare genetic condition that affects children's bones, spine, organs, and physical abilities. And while this access was available from an EAM approval, there was no access to this in the UK. So NICE felt that they needed more information before making a final decision on this treatment. Advocates from the MPS Society worked closely with experts and the National Health Services to create a managed access care agreement, which set the standards for access to patients while the company provided more data. And also the MPS Society lobbied the Prime Minister, and they worked on creating resource materials that would allow patients to understand how they could have access to this product. There's currently an extension of this program that's been requested, and advocates remained involved to ensure there's a fair process for access for this patient community. So I want to finish up today's presentation by talking about best practices, as well as offering some additional resources for those of you who would like to dig deeper into what's available. While best practices in collaborating on market access strategies often align with best practices on general patient engagement, there are a few places where specific practices should be attended to a bit more carefully. We've seen in the presentation the value that patients and advocates' input can bring early on in the process. Building mutual respect early is also key as your drug moves through the pipeline. If they're involved from early on, then they're going to understand that you've been serious about having that patient input, and that will help you along the entire drug development continuum. Regarding market access strategy, it's particularly critical that you pay attention to the independence of patients and organizations. It's always their decision alone as to whether they want to advocate for a certain position or not. Your role is to provide factual information and evidence and to talk with them about what some of the concerns are. Your own internal compliance guidelines should be consulted and attended to for the proper interaction. And we often recommend that some of those discussions around market access strategies be tabled with patients and advocates for 1 year prior to approval, particularly in the EU, to avoid any perception of undue influence. So that's another reason why having these discussions early makes a lot of sense. Advocates and patients want honest and transparent factual information, and they often bring great science expertise to the table in these discussions, so never discount the level of expertise that they have. A VOZ rule is that every time you speak with key opinion leaders, you should also be speaking with patients and advocates. They want to co-create solutions with you, and oftentimes their opinion is not considered in the same way that healthcare providers are. Utilizing their expertise in survey, PRO development, and registries will up the value proposition we spoke about earlier in the presentation. So on this slide, you'll see that I've listed a number of organizations that have been active in building best practices on patient engagement. DIA, in collaboration with Tufts, has conducted research on and created company self-assessments on patient engagement. UPATI in Europe has trained over 200 patient experts ready to support medicine development. Faster Cures houses many publications and tools that offer ideas on patient-focused drug development. PFMD, that we spoke about earlier, has built a coalition of stakeholders, including patients and advocates, to transform and understand and engage in the co-creation of research in medicine. Paradigm is a public-private partnership, yet led by the European Patients Forum and EPFIA, and it provides a structure for innovative and sustainable patient engagement, as well as hoping to find ways to demonstrate return on that engagement. And HTAI is a global nonprofit society based on health technology assessments. They've produced values and standards for patient involvement with HTA. I've also included, and you'll get this as part of the presentation, some articles that we found that were really valuable to us in putting together the presentation, so that will be accessible to you as well. I'd like to thank you for your attention today and let you know that if you have any questions or want to reach out to me about any aspects of today's presentation, I would be more than happy to hear from you. You can reach me at eColeman@VOZadvisors.com or visit our website or call me at 212-620-2751. Thank you so much for your attention.